And this is our 2024 Promaster Super High Roof.
Keep up the good work, team.
Thank you, thank you, thank
We're
you.
liking it. A lot of hustle going on.
We almost got one piece of wood in here.
One piece of wood.
Almost.
My God, at that rate,
We'll be done by... never.
never. Right. You got a 30-year mortgage on this house here
Yeah.
that you got? I mean,
Pretty much.
get all your remodeling done about the time you pay it off. All right. Quit fucking around. Keep going. You know where the Modelo is if you need like a little...
Soon. We got one in. I broke 2 rib nuts.
In this video, we'll be talking about the framing of the van. And if you watch a lot of YouTube videos, most people want to run their framing or the strapping parallel to the ribs of the van like this. And I think people probably understand the thermal bridging that happens, but they do it anyway, probably because of space. But we're in a super high roof, we have space to play with. I've been pretty focused on avoiding the thermal bridge at all costs with the lizard skin and the insulation, so I figured why wouldn't we do it with the framing as well. Something we did that most people don't do, or at least that I could find on YouTube, was we used ACX grade plywood, 3/4 inch, and we used a table saw to rip those down to about 2 inches. I didn't record any of this because most injuries happen with table saws, so one, I didn't want to be focused on videoing. I wanted to focus on the skill at hand and not cut off my fingers. And second, if I did cut off my fingers, I didn't want any video evidence of it happening. Lucky for me, I kept all 10 fingers, and I even gained a little bit more confidence, and we ended up doing the 3/4 inch ply, as well as some 1/4 inch ply and some 1/2 inch ply, all ACX grade, to help offset some of the spacing issues that you'll see in this video. And just another added layer of security, we just waterproofed all that just to make sure that we wouldn't deal with any problems down the road. But the benefit of using the plywood as your furring or your framing is that you're going to be using screws, not nails, and so it helps prevent the splitting of the wood. This project took me 2 weekends to complete, and you'll see me jumping around at different sections on different days, and I'm just showing it in that order just because I think it makes more sense to display it in that order versus me trying to figure it out in sequential order and showing you that way. I started this project with attaching some of the plywood to the bottom rails. Again, I'm trying to utilize the plywood to make minimal contact with each metal framing to reduce the thermal bridging, and I just created a little jig to help line up the holes. So I dashed a line right above the hole in the metal frame. I lined up these 2 boards and made a hash mark where I already drilled a hole through that piece of wood. And then it was just a matter of lining up the hash mark on the wood and the hash mark on the metal frame with the wood that you want to actually attach to the metal in between the metal and your jig. And basically the point of this is because I'm utilizing the hole that's already in the frame, and I need to figure out a way to get a hole to line up with the piece of wood that I want to attach to it. And so this is the way that we succeeded with that. After you get your pilot holes drilled, you can use a countersink bit here to widen the holes. That way your bolt will sit flush to the wood, and when you attach your plywood to the framing, nothing will interfere. Here I'm just using a step bit to widen the hole, so that way the rib nut can sit flush to the metal frame to attach the wood to. Make sure you prime any hole that you cut. After that, you can use your rib nut tool to drive the rib nut into the metal frame. Right here I'm using 1/4 20. After your rib nuts are set, you can set your board up to install. I hand tightened every 1/4 20 bolt with a washer all the way flush to the board. That was because on multiple occasions using the impact driver, it would spin the rib nut loose. So I found hand tighten first, all the way flush, and then just slightly tighten with the impact driver. And because nothing in a van is plumb or square, for a different section I had to do a different type of jig, and I found that just lying the drill on its side and pushing through the piece of wood that it would line up flush with the hole in the van. And from there, you can use that jig to mark center on the board, and then drill your pilot hole through the board that you want to attach to the van. After that, the steps are the same. So widen your hole with a step drill, prime your holes, place your Rivnuts, attach your board with the corner 20 bolt, tighten down. For this back section, I didn't use a jig. I didn't really like where the holes in the van were already placed, so I just ended up drilling through my piece of wood, just enough to make contact with the metal frame to make a mark, so I knew where to take the step bit. So then you can measure your reference point off that bottom board to the metal horizontal beam. Some people just cross right over that horizontal beam, but I want to land just underneath that, drill some pocket holes to attach it to minimize the contact points and thus minimize the thermal bridge. And just a quick dry fit of all the boards to make sure that they're going to fit, and then I'll pocket hole them. It's important to note that I didn't attach these just now at this moment. I was just making sure everything was going to fit. One, because I didn't know what else I was going to do going more vertical. I had to work around the bed frame with about 1.5 inches total on the bed frame, about 3/4 inch on either side. So once I had all the bottom vertical wood slats dry fitted, I didn't know where else to go. So the next day I came out and tried to figure out a way to install a frame around the window. I wasn't really sure how it was going to work or what to do, and there was some weather coming in, so it felt a little rushed and I was a little stressed, and I spent way too much time trying to figure it out and eventually bailed, and we would have to wait a whole nother week to come back up to finish the framing. A week later, feeling a little more refreshed, I was going to start at the window since that's where I left off. You'll see a lot of people that they'll just install a piece of wood here, usually a 1x6. I'm going to continue with the 2-inch wide ply, but instead of laying it flat on the metal, which opens it up to a lot of thermal bridging, I want to space it off the metal with these spacers I created out of 1/2-inch ply. And I didn't really know if it was going to work or if it was going to be sturdy, but after the install of the first one, I really liked how it looked, and it felt pretty sturdy to me pulling on it, and that was without construction adhesive. So I felt pretty confident it was going to work. You can take a 1/2-inch piece of ply and just batch off a few of these spacers by putting up a stop block on your miter and just pushing through. Then you can take all your spacers, use one to create a template, and I drilled a 5/16 hole that will fit the 1/4 screw through there. After drilling that hole, you can use a countersink bit to help widen the hole so that the bolt will sit flush to the spacer. From there, the steps are much like the same at the floor. You can use your spacer to line up where you want the hole, take your drill bit, drill through just to make a mark on the metal, switch over to your step bit, widen your hole enough to fit the Rivnut, prime the hole, use the Rivnut tool to place the Rivnut. I used 1/4 bolts to place the spacers, and then just wood screws to attach the actual plank to the spacers. And here you can see that it spaced the wood off just enough, that way you can have clearance against the ribs. It's also important to note I'm using construction adhesive between the metal and the wood spacers, and then wood glue between the wood spacers and the wood plank that I'm drilling into the wood. Here, I cut this board long to cross over the vertical metal rib, and then I use pocket holes to attach it to the other side. And then I just continued these steps and worked my way around the van. just demonstrating that the wood spacers bring that plywood out to clear the metal ribs, so that way when you attach your plywood over top of this for the wall panelings, you won't get any thermal or reduce the risk of thermal bridging. And here I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do for the middle section. I'm actually going to make this video into 2 parts, mainly because I go into a lot of explanation about why I'm doing it this way, and basically I'm trying to match the placement of the metal vertical beams, the black ones shown here that are supporting the bed frame. So I'm using the 2-inch ply to match the vertical beam. I'm just using pocket holes at the bottom and then a rib nut at the top. And then I'm laying a 1/4 inch ply on top of that to match the thickness of the black vertical beams. The goal is to match the width or the thickness of the black vertical beams, so that way when I lay the paneling of the wall on top of these supports, that it's going to meet the clearance between the vertical beams and the bed frame that's attached here. Like I said earlier in the video, I only have about a total of 1.5 inches to play with and 3/4 inches on the side, so the plan is to use somewhere between a 1/4 inch and 3/4 inch plywood or paneling for the walls. And in the next video I'll talk about how and why I notched these pieces of wood for the vertical supports for the top section of the van, and how I'm going to do the ceiling.